Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, of course, by the I Wish I Was a Black Man by Mr. AKHi TV. I like to review his videos every once in a while because he does a lot of things where he kind of tries to revise history a little bit and he tries to put things in a more delusional perspective, at least according, to my perspective. But anyways, in this video, we're going to be talking about the subject most recently about what Canelo Alvarez stated about Terence Bud Crawford, which was the truth, by the way. And for those of you that don't know what Canelo Alvarez recently stated, he said that although Terence Bud Crawford is a very good and a very great fighter, and that he has a lot of respect for him, that Terence Bud Crawford has legitimately only fought one good or great fighter within his career. And don't get me wrong, that's not me saying that Terence Bud Crawford hasn't fought good fighters within his career other than that of Errol Spence Jr. He fought Sean Porter, he fought Victor Postel, he fought that of Yuriorkis Gamboa. All those guys were very good to maybe borderline great if you want to go there. I don't think that I would go borderline great with Victor Postel or Sean Porter. I think that both of those guys maybe you can claim were A minus when Terence Bud Crawford defeated them. But I don't think that anyone's ever going to remember Sean Porter as a truly great fighter. He's a decently great fighter if you want to go that far, but I'm not even sure if I can go that far. I think that I can say that he was a very good fighter. Sean Porter, if I was going to compare him to another contender, if I was just going to think about it, I mean, he's along the lines of Danny Garcia, probably somewhere along those lines. Or maybe even a Joshua Clottey, somewhere along there. He might be a little bit better than those guys. But at the end of the day, Sean Porter was a guy that was known to give the top-notch competition a lot of, great fights. But, Sean Porter at the end of the day would usually lose the biggest fights of his career. If you were within that top 2 to top 3 range, you were more than likely beating Sean Porter. Whether it be Keith Thurman, or Kell Brook when he was at his best, or Terence Crawford, or Errol Spence Jr., he lost all those fights. It just is what it is. Now, he was able to beat some other fighters like Danny Garcia, Devin Alexander, I believe, Paulie Malignaggi. But none of those guys, I would claim, besides Danny Garcia, are A-grade level fighters. Just my view of it. But anyways, Canelo Alvarez, I thought that I would kind of talk about this because I'm sure after this era that there is going to be a certain amount of comparisons about both fighters and who is the greater fighter between the two. And it's a very interesting debate because Canelo Alvarez, in my view, clearly has the better resume of the two when you talk about the more legitimate and good fighters or great fighters that he's fought. But one certainly could debate that Terence Bud Crawford was more dominant, even in the biggest test of his career, surely. And on top of that, Terence Bud Crawford, one could debate that, he might be slightly more skilled than Canelo Alvarez. I'm not quite 100% sure if I would debate that, but one could debate that. One thing I'll say for sure is this. Terence Bud Crawford does have the better feet than Canelo Alvarez. I would also certainly say that he has better stamina. But where Canelo Alvarez would beat Terence Bud Crawford would probably be the defensive ability at his best. On top of that, one could say that he has a little bit of better head movement. And he certainly has a better resume than Terence Bud Crawford. There's just no question about it. So that's why I say both of these fighters, they're both all-time great fighters and all-time great talents, no doubt about it. I don't think that you can really say anything too negative about the other because both of these guys are all-time great fighters. But the question would be, is that who is the greater fighter? And is Canelo Alvarez, is there a little bit of truth to what he said? And in my view, there is a little bit of truth to it. It isn't that Terence Bud Crawford did not fight the guys that were somewhat available, although he could have certainly signed with the PBC much earlier and fought guys like Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman, and some other guys like that. But besides Errol Spence Jr., I can't really name another opponent that I would think of as truly exceptionally skilled on his resume. Just my view of it. Whereas when it comes to Canelo Alvarez, I possibly can. Or when you talk about, even possibly some other fighters, you might possibly be able to get there. Terence Bud Crawford, and I'm not saying that about, other fighters compared to today, but when you talk about other all-time great fighters, whether it be Sugar Ray Robinson, Floyd Mayweather Jr., Manny Pacquiao, other fighters like that, even if we want to go as far as Marquez or Cotto, like they have potentially, more A-grade level names on their resume than what Terence Bud Crawford has. And that's why this narrative of AKHi TV and a lot of these new media guys, when they say that, oh, well, now Terence Bud Crawford, he is hands down top 5 or top 10 of all time. I just can't agree with that. But the reason why they're doing that, once again, is because they want to make it seem like of every generation that the best fighter of that generation was a black American fighter. And I have no problem with that because a lot of the times the best fighter of a generation in boxing is that of a black American fighter. They usually are the most dominant within the sport. But they want to make sure that it pretty much is confirmed. They don't want names like Canelo Alvarez or Alexander Usyk or Tyson Fury or Naoya Inoue interrupted within that sphere. They don't want them within the same level of Terence Bud Crawford. That's why they go all in on Canelo Alvarez or some of these other fighters, and they try to pick apart their whole resume. And that's why they're going so batshit insane about this new recent Alexander Usyk thing, because it's going to be a way for them to tear Alexander Usyk down. That way, 10, 20 years later on down the line, they can say, oh, well, don't compare him to Terence Bud Crawford. Don't compare him to Devin Haney. Don't compare him, to these other black American fighters that we like, because we don't want to hear them in the same comparison as those guys. Those guys were all hyped. They were pushed by that of old media. And don't get me wrong, they are to a degree pushed by old media. But there's a lot of guys out there. There's a lot of athletes that are pushed by that of the media. The question is that, are they basically a house of cards? Are they all, faulty? Are they basically a fraudulent figure, or is there somewhat of substance to them? At the end of the day, there can be certain people that are hyped up majorly, but they have some substance to them. Conor McGregor, he was very hyped up, but eventually there was some substance there. He became a two-weight division champion, one of the only two-weight division champions within the UFC's history. Coco Gauff right now, she's one of the most hyped up tennis players, probably one of the more overrated female tennis players, if we're going to be honest. Even though she has a lot of potential, and I know that she's young, but eventually I believe that she'll win Grand Slams. There is a little bit of substance there. She'll eventually have to get out of that, the third or fourth round more consecutively. I believe that she made a finals not too long ago, although she lost, there's still some substance there. And when it comes to guys like Canelo, Usyk, and Lomachenko, and some of these other guys, but especially Canelo, Usyk, Inoue, Tyson Fury, those fighters especially, Inoue, there is massive substance there because they won the majority, if not all, of their big fights. But their goal at the end of the day is to make sure that those fighters never reach the same level as a Terence Bud Crawford or an Errol Spence Jr. or fighters that they like. And don't get me wrong, old media also has a very similar objective. That's why they like to tear down fighters like Mayweather or possibly Shakur Stevenson or other black fighters. Don't get me wrong, they have a very similar agenda. But that's why I say new media, all they are is the opposite version of old media. That's all they are. They're the pro-black version, the pro-black cult version of old media. That's all they are. That's why they even call themselves new media, because they're at war with old media to basically be the same. They're just doing it in reverse, but it is what it is. Anyways, let's see what Mr. AKHi TV has to say. Let's get straight into it.
Respect Terence Crawford. He's a very talented fighter, but he just win one big fight. If you see his record.
Now, we see here that AKHi TV is showing a lot of pictures. And Canelo Alvarez is stating that he won, just one big fight. Let's take a look at all the fights here. The first one is Victor Postol. That was one of the bigger wins in his career. But Victor Postol was a good fighter. He was not a great fighter. The second one is Breidis Prescott. Of course, that was one of the bigger wins in his career. But that's like claiming that, when Gervonta Tank Davis beat Jose Pedraza, that he was a great fighter. Or like when Canelo Alvarez, when he beat someone like, I'm trying to think about it, someone early on in his career when maybe it was a little bit unexpected that, that makes him a great fighter. Like, come on. Breidis Prescott, it's no offense against him, but Breidis Prescott, of course, Terrence, he was coming off, I believe, only 2 weeks of preparation. So I give him a lot of credit. But at the end of the day, Breidis Prescott was never a great fighter. He was a guy that eventually was exposed as a C-grade level fighter. Of course, he defeated guys like Amir Khan early on in his career, but Breidis Prescott was never a great fighter. The next one is Gamboa. That was one of the better wins in his career, of course, as well. One could debate that's anywhere from second to third. The next fight is Jeff Horn. He is not a great fighter. I don't want to hear anything about that one. The next fight looks like Amir Khan, or whatever fight that was. And he pretty much was done. Kell Brook was completely washed up by the time Terence Bud Crawford fought him. Jose Benavidez is not a great fighter. Never won a belt. Sean Porter is a very good fighter. You could debate him as an A-grade level fighter. And Errol Spence, of course, is a very great fighter. So Once again, when we talk about very great fighters, he has one very great fighter on his record. When you talk about good fighters to borderline great fighters, he probably has about three more. But all the other guys, no.
So he just beat.
And if we're putting Canelo Alvarez's resume up here, you'd have to put that of, I'm trying to think, Austin Trout, who I'm not going to say was very great, but was good. He was an A-grade level fighter at the time, coming off of a victory over Miguel Cotto. Then after that, you would have to have, I'm trying to think here, you would have to have Arasani Lara, who was a very good to borderline great fighter. Although, of course, his career did not pan out quite as well. He was an exceptionally skilled fighter. You would have Gennady Golovkin, who, of course, is a great fighter. You would have to claim that he's probably along the same lines as Errol Spence Jr., because he at one point in time was top 5 pound for pound, just like Errol Spence Jr. was. You would also have Danny Jacobs up there, who's a borderline great fighter. He would debatably be right there with Sean Porter, but probably a little bit better than Sean Porter, because Danny Jacobs was, at one point in time, one of the top 2 best middleweights in the world. He knocked out Peter Quillen. He also beat Sergey Dervyachenko, who's not really a great fighter, but a good fighter. I think it was his first professional loss against Danny Jacobs. There's a couple of other very good wins on that record as well. You would also have Caleb Plant. You would also have Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, Miguel Cotto, who, of course, is one of the more all-time great fighters. And he was a champion when Canelo Alvarez defeated him. You would have Sergey Kovalev, who still was a champion when he defeated him. And there's a couple of other fighters. That's not even including some of the other just good or B-grade fighters that he beat, like Amir Khan or that of, what was his name? Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. That's not even including them. So, once again, there is no debate about it when you talk about the resume, that Canelo Alvarez's resume is clearly above Terence Bud Crawford's.
One good fighter like Errol Spence is. Yes. But other than that, I don't think he's beating other great fighter like Spence. He did a really good job with Spence. He did like almost look very easy. But I knew
it wasn't almost very easy. It was very easy. It was a great performance by that of Terence Bud Crawford. Let me also talk about this, because I've seen in certain boxing polls and groups where they said that Errol Spence was exposed as a one-dimensional fighter. I'm not going to say that Errol Spence is a one-dimensional fighter, but when you're in the ring with a guy that is pretty much better than you in every single category, they can make you look very one-dimensional. It just is what it is. That's what all-time great fighters can do. They can take away what you do best, and they can make you look very, very, very very one-dimensional, because they'll try to take away what you do best, and sometimes that leaves you, because when you already something is taken away from you that you do best, if you keep trying it, they already know how to counter it, so it makes you look like you're worse, and then if you try something new, maybe that you're not comfortable with, you're not going to perform it as well as what you already know, so they make you look a lot worse than what you probably actually are. And that was the case with Terence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence Jr.
Terence Crawford is a great fighter. But you never know in boxing. We'll see.
So, boxing pound for pound number 1, Terence Bud Crawford, responded to Canelo Alvarez stating that Crawford only has one good win. In other words, he didn't fight nobody but Errol Spence. Terence Crawford said, quote, "Here we go with that."
Yes, and in terms of great fighters, not necessarily good fighters, but great fighters, he's absolutely correct.
"I haven't fought nobody but Spence talk. Laugh out loud. Y'all so delusional, it's crazy. Laughing emoji." End of the quote. Remember, the last time somebody said Crawford didn't fight anybody was Errol Spence, and we all saw what happened to him. Crawford delivered the biggest ass whipping of the century for that, and it seems like Canelo is next to follow.
Well, we'll see about that, but we all know Canelo, that he's not going to get any credit anyway from these guys, whether he beats Terence Bud Crawford. So Terence is pretty much in a win-win situation, because his fans, and don't get me wrong, to a degree, it's going to be an exceptional excuse, because, Canelo Alvarez clearly is bigger. When we talk about the Canelo versus Jermell Charlo fight, that's not really one where it's really a massive size disadvantage like many people are trying to allege. Not only is Jermell Charlo like 5'11" or 6 foot, and on top of that he's lengthier than Canelo, but he's a guy that clearly could be fighting at middleweight. So, and Canelo is not really a natural 168 pounder anyway. So that's not really, you know, the massive size disadvantage that they say it is. To be quite honest with you, they're probably similar in size, even in terms of weight. You know, maybe Canelo might have the slight advantage, but I guarantee you, Jamel is not that light in the ass. He's not that light. But Terence Bud Crawford, that would be a different situation because Terence would be a legitimate 160.
At the end of the day, or at least the night, Canelo can repeat.
But I promise you that Canelo Alvarez, even at this point in time right now in his career, he would be the best and the greatest fighter that Terence Bud Crawford would ever face. Because he has better head movement than Errol Spence Jr. He has better defense. He has more multi-dimensional skills within his skill set. He has higher boxing IQ. He can just do more within what he can do. And, you know, these guys, they try to act like Canelo's just this average Mexican fighter, but they don't truly believe that. And you can tell that they don't truly believe that with a lot of the stuff that they say. You know, they talk all this shit about, oh, well, this guy will beat Canelo, this guy will beat Canelo, this guy will beat Canelo. But every time Canelo's about to fight him, they change their mind all of a sudden. You know, and they always try to degrade him on a daily basis. You know why that is? Because they know that a lot of people are going to remember Canelo as an all-time great fighter. So they have to try and change the history and the reality.
The haters' narrative all he wants. But that won't change the fact Crawford is still pound for pound number one. And Crawford has a
I agree. Right now, he is pound for pound number one.
better resume than Canelo.
Well, no, he doesn't have a better resume than Canelo. But you're going to promote that narrative because, once again, you're part of the LDBC and new media fanboy narrative. Anyone who actually knows boxing and has an actual brain knows that Canelo Alvarez has a better resume than Terence Bud Crawford. It just is what it is. And I like Terence Bud Crawford. Terence is a fabulous fighter. He's an amazing fighter. But no, he does not have a better resume than that of a Canelo Alvarez. Just is what it is. Now, he has a better resume probably than Naoya Inoue, debatably. You know, he might even have a better resume than someone like a Usyk or someone like that. But does he have a better resume than that of a Canelo Alvarez? No.
Comes to the fighters he beat. See, we're not talking about the fighters he lost to, because that don't even count. We talking about the fighters Canelo beat. Ultimately, Crawford beat better opponents than Canelo.
Well, no, he didn't. But, you know, AKHi is going to try to put that narrative out there. Like I said, take a look at all the welterweights that he beat other than Errol Spence Jr. It's no offense, but they were pretty much all bums that the majority of the elite welterweights could beat. You put Idris Velasquez and Jose Benavidez and Jeff Horn, you put all the guys that Terence Bud Crawford beat at welterweight in the ring with even a Danny Garcia or possibly even a Yordenis Ugas, I promise you that they lose, that you know, all those fighters lose to Yordenis Ugas or Danny Garcia or pretty damn close to it. None of those fighters were A-grade level fighters. In fact, the majority of them, or some of them, were not even B.
So for Canelo to have the audacity to say something like that is mind-blowing. Because
no, it's not really mind-blowing. It's just that you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Or, you know, you're trying to promote a narrative, you know, once again, because you know you have to try to tear down Canelo Alvarez as much as possible.
You can't ignore the fact Crawford knocked out Sean Porter, a fighter who has never been knocked out before.
Isn't it interesting that these guys claim that, oh, well, Canelo fought Danny Jacobs, you know, when he already lost or when he wasn't coming off, you know, the best performance of his career. Terence Bud Crawford fought Sean Porter when he couldn't even knock out a dude that wasn't even known, apparently from what I remember. You know, or, you know, Terence, you know, he beat Sean Porter when Sean Porter couldn't even stop a dude that wasn't even known. So at the end of the day, you know, where are the narratives then? That just goes to show you that they don't even truly believe their own bullshit. You know, Kell Brook and Amir Khan, by the way, they were completely done.
I'll agree. Canelo has never had a...
And when I say completely done, I'm not talking about, you know, oh, well, they just, you know, weren't quite as good as what they were before. I'm talking about that they would have never won a belt ever again in their career. Not in any weight division. That's what I mean by done. So when I say done, I'm not talking about a fighter that's just a little bit older. Like when Canelo Alvarez defeated Kovalev or when he defeated that of a Miguel Cotto. You can claim that those fighters maybe weren't quite the same if you want to debate that. But there are still certain fighters that are still A-grade level fighters. Like Oscar De La Hoya, when he lost to Mayweather, sure, he wasn't necessarily in his prime years. He had slowed down a little bit. He had lost a couple paces, but he was still an A-grade level fighter. He was still decently competitive. Kell Brook and Amir Khan were done.
Dominant performance like Crawford did against Errol Spence, nor a knockout win like Crawford did against Errol Spence and Sean Porter. In fact, forget about the Errol Spence.
Well, I'll say this. AKHi TV does make a very interesting point about Terence Bud Crawford. He did not have, Canelo did not have the dominating performance. If we're talking about the biggest win of their career, it's around the same level. Canelo Alvarez beat Gennady Golovkin, of course, two very competitive fights. And then, of course, the other time, Errol Spence and Terence, they had their fight. Terence, of course, was much more dominant, in his fight than what Canelo Alvarez in both of his fights combined with Gennady Golovkin. So that's certainly something that you can bring up. But in terms of Sean Porter, Sean Porter is probably around the same level as Billy Joe Saunders or Caleb Plant. And he was able to stop both of those guys. And some people would say, oh, how could you say that Sean Porter is right there with Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant? You know why that is? Because both of those guys were A- level fighters. They can win some of the bigger fights in their career, but they're never going to beat the creme de la creme. Same as Sean Porter.
Let's win. Canelo Alvarez has never knocked out an opponent on the level of Sean Porter like Crawford did. Every time.
Well, once again, that's not true. He knocked out Caleb Plant, and he also knocked out that of Billy Joe Saunders. And once again, a lot of people, they'll say, oh, how could you say that? Those fighters are not on the same level. Yes, they are. Sean Porter is not a great fighter. Okay, he's a Hall of Famer, and he's a guy that, won some decent fights in his career. He's an A- level fighter at best. He's not anything above that.
Canelo stepped up in competition against good oppositions that are not even on the level of a Sean Porter, Canelo either ends up robbing his opponent like he did against Lara, or the fight ends up
a fight that couldn't win either way,
being so close that it could have went either way. The irony of it all.
Well, no, because AKHi is now trying to allege that Lara, in terms of skills, that he was on the same level as Sean Porter. Erislandy Lara, if they had ever fought, if Sean Porter and Erislandy Lara had ever fought, Lara would have probably knocked him out. Because Lara not only would have had the size and reach advantage, his skill set and his boxing IQ would have been a level or two above that of Sean Porter. It's no offense against Sean Porter, but he was never the highest in terms of the IQ department in terms of boxing. So no, let's just stop. And Gennady Golovkin, he certainly is above Sean Porter. Sean Porter was never a top 10 pound for pound fighter. Never. Gennady Golovkin at one point in time was looked at as one of the top 5 pound for pound fighters in boxing. This is why I like to review their videos, because these guys are so delusional. Either they're so delusional, or they actually are so delusional to the point to where they actually believe that these narratives can hook a certain amount of people. But of course, they probably can, because a lot of people really don't know the difference between their ass and a hole in the ground.
For Canelo to have the audacity to say anything about Crawford like that, when Crawford already beat the likes of Errol Spence, Sean Porter, Kell Brook, Benavidez, Amir Khan, Jeff Horn, Postal, Gamboa.
All the guys that you mentioned after that, besides Postal and Gamboa, were guys that were not good fighters, or they were not great fighters. So let's just stop. Once again, this always kills me. They let the go on this narrative, about how Canelo, he ain't fought no one and all sorts of shit, about how he's cherry picking, he ain't fought no one. But they say, man, take a look at what Terence Crawford has defeated. Aegis Kavalasquez, and Jose Benavidez and Jeff Horn. Like, dude, those fighters ain't shit. Like, none of those fighters are even going to make it into the Hall of Fame. Now, Amir Khan and Kell Brook, they'll make it to the Hall of Fame, probably, but they were completely done by the time Terence Bud Crawford had washed them up. Literally anyone that was elite within that weight division could have defeated either one of those fighters. They were done. They were chopped liver.
Prescott. And the list goes on and on and on to become
Breeders Prescott, a C-grade level fighter. These are the comparisons that this idiot actually is trying to make. It just goes to show you that he doesn't know shit about boxing.
A 3-division world champ and a 2 times undisputed champion. The first one to...
I will say that is an advantage that Terence Bud Crawford certainly has over that of Canelo Alvarez. And it's going to be an advantage that he actually has over a certain amount of fighters. And I'll say this, Terence Bud Crawford, if he does end up undisputed in a 3rd weight class, which he's most certainly will if he goes to 154 and doesn't make up a huge jump, at least at first, because even if Jermell Charlo at his best is there's no fighters that are going to be able to compete with his talent there and his boxing IQ. There's none. Who is it going to be? What, Tim Tszyu, Brian Castano, Jamel Charlo? Like, get out of here.
Ever do it in the four belts era. Crawford did it again.
I will say this, a fight between him and someone that's a little bit more lengthy for that weight division that can actually box, it'd be very interesting. I would have liked to seen him versus Tony Harrison a few years ago when Tony still had a little bit left in him. Right now, he's pretty much done. But that would have been very interesting. Or someone like an Araceli Lara. That would have been a fantastic fight, actually. Prime Araceli Lara versus Prime Terence Bud Crawford. That would have been very interesting.
All of these named opponents I just mentioned. I mean, at this point, this is not up.
Let me also bring up this point, because a lot of people, they probably aren't going to realize this. Canelo Alvarez is pretty much within that same category as Roberto Duran and some of these other guys. When you talk about, and I'm not going to say necessarily quite the same, because Canelo is a big, stocky guy. It's not necessarily like he's light in the ass, but Canelo Alvarez is a guy that once he started to move up to 160 and 168, he was already fighting guys that were bigger than him. He was fighting guys a bit smaller than him when he was fighting at 147, but when he was fighting at 160 to 168 to 175, the majority of those guys were all bigger than what he was. They were lengthier. They were had more reach on them. They may have been even a little bit stockier. And Canelo Alvarez at 5'8" and a 71-inch arm reach, smaller than Terence Bud Crawford in terms of his, physical dimensions in terms of height and reach, or at least reach. He was actually able to go up and become a champion at 168, 160, and 175. One point that I do have to mention about Terence Bud Crawford, I don't think that there's ever been a weight division where he didn't really naturally fit there, or that he was not bigger than those guys. Because he was bigger than a lot of the natural 140-pounders. He was bigger, certainly, than a lot of the 135-pounders, and he's around the same size as welterweights. He's pretty much a natural welterweight.
For debate.
And don't get me wrong, that's not me discrediting him. He made the weight, and on top of that, there were certain fighters that were similar in size at the time when he did it, like Victor Postel, and some other guys, But Terence Bud Crawford, when you talk about his size, he's really more of a welterweight, because even at 140, he was rehydrating 20 pounds over that of the weight limit. And if you rehydrate at 160, you're pretty much a natural welterweight, because that's what guys like Maidana and Miguel Cotto, and Shea Mosley were rehydrating at.
You can say Crawford arguably has the best resume in boxing.
Well, no, he doesn't. What Terence Bud Crawford's advantages is that he's debatably the most dominant fighter in all of boxing, debatably the most skilled, and on top of that, he has been the undisputed champion in 2 separate weight classes, which no one else has done before in terms of men's boxing.
Oh, what the heck?
Which really is the only part of boxing that truly matters when we talk about all-time great, accomplishments. Because there's no offense against the women's circuit. I'm not saying that some of them can't fight. But, let's be real. Name 10 women fighters that you know within the past 20 years. Because I know Layla Ali, I know Katie Taylor, Jessica McCaskill, Amanda Serrano, Michaela Meyer, Clarissa Shields, and Alicia Baumgardner. That's about all the fighters on the and Ann Wolf. That was like what, 7, 8 maybe. That's about all the female fighters that I can name you, because I'm sorry, but most of those women's circuits, they have no goddamn competition whatsoever.
What is Canelo talking about? Last time I checked, Crawford has been on the pound-for-pound list for a decade. Before Canelo.
Right, and so has Naoya Inoue, and so has a lot of these other fighters. What the hell does that really, what does that even say? All that means is that you're an exceptional fighter, and it's great that he was on the pound-for-pound list. Canelo Alvarez has been on the pound-for-pound list for a very long time as well, so I don't really know what that point actually means.
Even entered the pound-for-pound list. And when Canelo is no longer on the pound-for-pound list 10 years later.
Well, he's no longer on your pound-for-pound list, but that's because, let's be real, it's the pro-blackety-black pound-for-pound list, so that they're going to try and put all the fighters off that pound-for-pound list as much as possible, but especially Canelo, because they can't stand his ass. And the reason why they can't stand him is because they realize he's the biggest threat to debatably be the best fighter of this generation.
Guess who's still on
And the reason why that is, the reason why they always go after Canelo Alvarez, and they'll go after Fury, they'll go after Usyk and Inoue as well, but the reason why they realize with Canelo, because they realize, deep down, even though they don't want to admit it, that he has the resume and that he's done work within a multitude of weight divisions. Usyk is never going to go above that heavyweight, so they don't have to worry about him as much. In a way, although he's good, a lot of those lighter weight fighters, in the 120s, they're not really going to be that fondly remembered. And he's probably not going to be able to go much higher, maybe than that of 130, when it comes down to it. And Tyson Fury, of course, he's only going to be within that of heavyweight. So they realize that the main threat is Canelo and that they have to try and tear him down as much as possible.
Top of the throne on the pound-for-pound list. That's right. No other than Crawford. Since Bivol beat the pound-for-pound list out of Canelo, he kicked Canelo out of the pound-for-pound list. The beatdown was so...
Well, no, he didn't really kick Canelo out of the pound-for-pound list because that makes no sense. Canelo Alvarez was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, and on top of that, he was fighting a guy that you could debate was about 2 weight classes bigger than him in terms of stature. So that doesn't really make any sense because they still have Errol Spence within their top 10 pound-for-pound, and he just got his ass kicked by Terence Crawford. And, he's only done work within 1 weight division. So once again, their standards make no sense, but they're not supposed to because these guys are super huge fanboys and they're a pro-black cult.
Bad. Canelo didn't even want to get his revenge. To make matters worse,
and what that fight would be like, is if Terence Crawford, with his stature, if he fought that of a prime Canelo Alvarez at 160 or a prime Gennady Golovkin at 160. That's what that fight would be like. Because Dimitri Bivol is a natural light heavyweight fighter, and he's an exceptionally skilled light heavyweight fighter. He's no slouch. He's one of the best light heavyweight fighters of all time. All right, so that's what that fight would be like.
It was a loss in a cherry pick.
And that's why I had to say, that Canelo Alvarez, he's fighting guys that are bigger than him. Terence Crawford has never really fought someone in terms of stature that's been decently bigger than him. Errol Spence may have been a little bit thicker, but he doesn't have the reach over Terence Crawford. He maybe had a little bit of the height, but they're pretty much around the same size. Canelo has fought a multitude of guys that have been lengthier and bigger than him, including Gennady Golovkin, including possibly Araceli Lara, at least in terms of the reach, including that of Chavez Jr., including that of Caleb Plant, including that of Sergey Kovalev, and a multitude of other fighters. Callum Smith, Danny Jacobs, all those guys.
Gone wrong. Bivol was supposed to be a nobody. So guess what?
Well, no, he wasn't supposed to be a nobody. It's just that you guys tried to promote that narrative. So once again, if Canelo Alvarez did win the fight, you could say that he just fought another bum. But anyone who actually knew boxing, which AKHi TV doesn't, anyone who knew boxing knew that Dimitri Bivol was a great fighter. Not just a good fighter, a great fighter.
Nobody ended up beating Canelo. That's how bad Canelo is. I mean, how bad can it get? Canelo is over here ducking, cherry picking, and still losing to nobodies. And to be clear, when I say a nobody...
Yes, he lost to a nobody who beat Gilberto Soto Ramirez, John Pascal, Canelo Alvarez, Joe Smith Jr. And let me get this straight. He dominated all those guys. Like, the fights weren't even close. And Canelo Alvarez, who's 5'8", with the 70-inch arm reach, he gave Dimitri Bivol the toughest fight of his career. Not the cruiserweight, basically Gilberto Soto Ramirez, not John Pascal. Canelo Alvarez did.
Means a fighter that...
That's why I say I can't really compare it to those same standards because Crawford has never fought someone within that same type of way. That would be like Terence Crawford if he fought Canelo, or Gennady Golovkin in their best form. He's never done something like that.
Public doesn't know. Not a name opponent. On the other hand, Crawford is fighting the best, never ducked anybody, and he has dominated or knocked out every single A-level opposition he fought against.
Well, there's not much A-level opposition. And no, he hasn't knocked out all the A-level opposition because he didn't knock out Victor Postal. Unless you don't want to call Victor Postal an A-grade level fighter. It is what it is. Now, he did knock out Errol Spence, he did knock out Sean Porter, and he did knock out Yuriorkis Gamboa. But let's be real, are those guys, Sean Porter and Yuriorkis Gamboa especially, are those guys really, really, really confirmed A-grade level fighters? I'll give them the grade of A-, but they're not on the same level as Gennady Golovkin. They're not on the same level as Araceli Lara. I don't even quite know if they're on the same level as a Danny Jacobs. Just my personal view.
Actual name opponents that I mentioned earlier. So think about that. Crawford is not just dominating name opponents, he's also dominating great fighters such as Errol Spence in a fight that was supposed to be the fight of the decade, a 50-50 fight. However, Crawford turned that fight into the ass whipping of the century. That's how dominant Crawford was. The only time we see Canelo that dominant is usually when Canelo is the one that's getting his ass beat, respectfully, by Floyd and Bivol. However,
you certainly can say that in the biggest fight of his career against Mayweather, that Canelo Alvarez lost. However, I'm not quite sure if Crawford would beat that guy either. You know, it's no offense against Crawford, but he's never really fought someone even close to the Floyd Mayweather Jr. level. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is a guy that is the debatable greatest fighter of all time. And that's why I can't say that Terence Bud Crawford is without a doubt above Canelo. And if I were going to rank both of the fighters, I would probably have to put Canelo Alvarez above Terence Bud Crawford in terms of the all-time greats, just because of his resume alone. And the skill set, you can debate who's more skilled between the two, whoever you have, but the skill set is so close when you talk about what one does well over the other. The resume is not close. You know, the accomplishments, they're kind of right there with each other. You know, Canelo's a 4-weight division champion, Crawford's a 3, but of course Crawford has, you know, the 2 undisputed titles. And then on top of that, you know, the dominance, he probably has that over Canelo. But I mean, how hard is it to be dominant over a lot of the fighters that he's fought? Let's just be real. But of course, to give Terence Bud Crawford credit, he was very dominant in the Errol Spence Jr. fight. He was very dominant against Victor Postol. Now, in the Sean Porter and Yuriorkis Gamboa fights, he wasn't really super dominant. He probably still lost about 3 or 4 rounds in both of those fights, but he still, of course, ended up stopping them. So you have to give him a lot of credit.
every time Canelo went up against a good opponent in a 50-50 fight, like I said before, the fight either ends up...
Well, actually, no. He didn't face just good opponents, AKHi. He fought great opponents and repeated great opponents. And that's probably the point that Canelo Alvarez was making about Terence Bud Crawford, and I have to agree. He's only really ever fought one great opponent. He's fought a lot of good opponents, but only one true great one.
In a robbery or a controversial decision, such as Lara and Triple G. Canelo literally...
Isn't that interesting that now he calls it a controversial decision? When before, when they were trying to tear down Gennady Golovkin, they said, well, I thought it was a draw, so Golovkin quit bitching. You know, and then in the second fight, oh, well, Canelo beat him, so Golovkin was this hype job. Now, all of a sudden, that they need to tear down Canelo Alvarez, it was controversial, or it was a robbery. Once again, it goes to show you that they don't truly believe in a lot of the stuff that they say.
Got caught using steroids against Triple G, and he's still...
That also is true. That would be one advantage that Terence does have over Canelo. Canelo was caught on PEDs. So if you have a list, where the PEDs matter to you, then of course, that is something that can be taken into factorization. To me, it's not enough because there's been a lot of all-time great fighters that, in my view, more than likely, were probably on the juice. You know, including Manny Pacquiao, Roy Jones Jr., Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker, Bernard Hopkins, possibly a couple of others, Juan Manuel Marquez. So I just don't know if it's enough for me.
Still couldn't dominate. Therefore, when Canelo said that, clearly he's envious and jealous of the success and praise Crawford has been receiving for the Errol Spence win and for knocking out every single opponent for the past 6 years at the highest level.
Yes, at the highest level. We all know that Aegis Kavalauskas and Jose Benavidez and Jeff Horn, we all know that those guys are killers. Like, get out of here. Now, I will say this. Maybe Canelo Alvarez, maybe there's a part of him that sees that the end of his prime is nearing and that the end of his career is starting to end near. So maybe there's still a part of him that is trying to cling on to that. But do I think that he's super envious or jealous of Terence? No. I think that he just said from his perspective, and I think that there's some truth in it.
Canelo could never do, even while he's cheating on steroids. That's a fact. That's not up for debate. But we shall see if Canelo is going to be able to be victorious against Charlo and what he's going to do next. Is he going to...
Yes, and if he beats Jermell Charlo, which more than likely he will, he's not going to get any credit for that win. But remember, Vasily Lomachenko, why are you not fighting Terence Bud Crawford? Go up and fight Terence Bud Crawford, even though you're a natural 130 pounder. Errol Spence gets credit for Mikey Garcia. Canelo, why are you not fighting Alexander Usyk if you want to go up the cruiserweight? Remember those standards? Once again, a hater will never keep the same standards. The difference between a hater and the difference between, once again, that of a logical or an objective commentator, because most people don't know the difference, is that an objective commentator, if we're talking about a race in terms of a race, they just want to see if you can possibly cross that finish line. So they'll say, let's just say we're talking about Jerome Butenis, for example, and we say, well, you know what? I kind of have to see how great he is. So let's see if he can defeat Errol Spence Jr. next. And he ends up defeating Errol Spence Jr. How a hater will handle that situation is that he'll make all sort of excuses, or all of a sudden the standards will change, or, oh, it was different, blah, blah, blah. They'll make all the excuses in the world because, once again, the truth is about a hater is that the finish line really is non-existent. It's non-existent. They draw it there when it comes down to it, but you're never going to finish that race for them. You can never appease them because they're always going to push that finish line more and more and more and more back. An objective commentator will not move the finish line. They just want to see if you can cross it in the first place. That's the point. So they'll say, well, let's see if he defeats Errol Spence Jr. And if he defeats him, they'll say, you know what? I got to give him a lot of credit. Maybe there were certain factors, but he proved me wrong. He showed me that he was the real deal. That's the difference between an objective and logical commentator. But, it is what it is.
Fight Crawford after Crawford has to move up 3 weight divisions. Surprisingly, even then, fans, experts, and fighters alike are favoring Crawford to beat Canelo. In fact,
well, are they really favoring him to beat Canelo Alvarez? And if they are favoring him to beat Canelo Alvarez, good. That means that if Canelo Alvarez wins that fight, that means that Canelo's better than Terence Bud Crawford, right? Because once again, remember the standards when Vasily Lomachenko had to fight Crawford, he had to fight Usyk, Canelo had to fight Usyk. It's an excuse to bring up size within those fights, right? Even though clearly there's a weight or a size disadvantage there. So we should do the same standards with Crawford, right? But that's not going to happen. Because once again, their objective at the end of the day is to make sure fighters like Canelo Alvarez that they don't make it to the great conversation in the first place. And that's all they are. They're an envious pro-black cult that wishes that the other demographics would treat their favorite or their black fighters better. And they're envious, overall, and they have a lot of vitriol and a lot of racial agendas. And they basically said, well, if you're going to treat our fighters this way, we're going to treat your fighters that way. And that's why these guys cannot be trusted.
Oscar De La Hoya came out recently stating that Canelo feet are stuck in mud. In other words, he has no footwork. While Crawford...
Well, Canelo Alvarez's foot positioning seems okay. The problem with Canelo is that he can be flat-footed. He's not a guy that has ever had super quick feet because he can be flat-footed. I agree with Oscar there a little bit. Let's also be real about Oscar, though, who, by the way, is one of the more overrated fighters within boxing history when it comes down to it. He clearly has an agenda with Canelo right now because, Canelo is the one that got away, and he's a little bit pissed off.
It's like he floating on water, the way his footwork is connected with his upper body movement.
And I agree with that. Terence Bud Crawford does have better feet than a Canelo Alvarez, no doubt about it.
While Oscar De La Hoya said he sees Crawford beating Canelo like a kid, even though Crawford has to move up 3 weight divisions. Like I said before, if Canelo and Crawford were fighting in the same division...
It wouldn't really be 3 weight divisions, though. It'd be more like 2. Because like I said, Canelo, he's not a natural 168 pounder.
Canelo will never fight Crawford because most likely Crawford will knock out Canelo in less than 3 rounds. I mean, even Canelo admitted.
And you see that these guys, once again, they're setting up the precedent. They're setting up the standards of, oh, well, Canelo should fight Terence Bud Crawford. He's scared because he's going to lose. And then other times they're like, oh, well, of course Canelo might call out Terence Bud Crawford because, he's divisions lighter. So like I said, what a hater will do is that they're always going to change the finish line. They'll race the finish line and then they'll place it even longer for you because, and that's why life lessons are so important. And the life lesson is so important about you can't appease everybody because there are certain people that they're just envious, they're just jealous of you, or that their main objective is to always tear you down. They're never going to accept you for who you are, even if you're a completely good person, or even if you have a lot of success in your life and you're doing everything, correct. you're never going to appease them because they don't like you. So it is what it is.
Nobody beats Crawford at 147 to 154. Nobody. He sees.
I would agree with that. And at 154, there's going to be nobody to compete with him. I mean, I'm sorry, Tim Tszyu, like he's a good little fighter, but he's not great. Brian Castano, he's pretty much done. Jamel Charlo, like I said, he's always been a little bit overrated in my view. And none of those fighters are going to beat Crawford, not unless they land the perfect punch.
Nobody beating Crawford. Was shot.
Like I said, I would have loved to have seen Crawford versus Araceli Lara, or Crawford versus Canelo, Crawford versus Golovkin. I would have loved to seen all those fights.
About that.
A fight that I would have loved to see, if we're just comparing against other great welterweights, I would have loved to seen him versus Shane Mosley or Miguel Cotto. I think that more than likely he would have beat Shane Mosley because Shane, even though he was a good to great fighter, probably a great fighter, because he accomplished a lot in his career, he did kind of get exposed for some of a little bit of a skill set gap in some of the bigger fights in his career. Like when he fought Miguel Cotto, like a lot of people tried to claim that fight was a robbery and that, the fight was super close. If you really watch it with a keen eye, the fight really was not that close. It was like 8-4 or 9-3 in favor of Miguel Cotto. I would have loved to see Miguel Cotto against Crawford because Cotto probably would have been the greatest opponent and the most skilled opponent that Crawford would have ever fought in his career. Had you transferred the best version of Cotto and put him in the ring with Terence Bud Crawford, or Manny Pacquiao, or possibly maybe even a Marcos Maidana, that would have been very interesting. Marquez, although he probably would have beat Marquez and Maidana because Maidana, he was a very rough and tough fighter, but he was a guy that, he did have some skills deficits, and Marquez, he was a bit small for 147, as well as Manny Pacquiao. Floyd, of course, would have been a great fight as well. That would have been very interesting because both of those guys would have been boxing geniuses.
As Canelo came out stating that all of the 147-pounders are bigger than him. So if that's the case...
well, they might be a little bit stockier than him partially, but Terence Bud Crawford is around the same size as those guys. Like I said, Crawford naturally rehydrates at about 160, maybe even a little bit heavier. And he's been doing that for years. So these guys, don't let that fool you. Terence Bud Crawford is not really smaller than a lot of these guys, if really smaller at all.
How come he don't fight Crawford at 154 then, or 147? Well, the obvious answer, according to Canelo, is because nobody beats Crawford at 147 nor at 154. That's the ultimate reason Canelo doesn't want to fight Crawford at 154 nor 147. Remember, I didn't say all of...
Why the hell would Canelo Alvarez want to fight him at 154 or 147? What the fuck are you even talking about? Are you literally talking about Canelo Alvarez? And maybe I just read it wrong. Are you literally talking about Canelo Alvarez possibly going down all the way to 147? Like, dude, that doesn't even make any sense.
This. Canelo did. He said out of his own mouth that all of the 147-pounders are bigger than him. With the facts being laid out, drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Subscribe below. And to be continued on the next episode of AKHi TV. Peace out.
Well, that's pretty much about it for today. Do I think that Canelo was envious or jealous when he stated this? No, I think that there's a little bit of truth to it. Of course, I think that there's a part of him that is saying this because of the competitive aspect, because there's a lot of people that are putting Crawford over him, and I think that a little bit of that competitiveness is coming out. Do I think that he necessarily came from a malicious or jealous standpoint? No, because I agree a little bit with Canelo. Other than Errol Spence, I don't think he has fought any other great fighters in his career. I think that Sean Porter is a very good fighter, but is he a great fighter? No. Victor Postol was a good little fighter. Was he great? No. Yuriorkis Gamboa was a decently great, maybe borderline great fighter, but even that's debatable. Other than Errol Spence, and I give Terence Bud Crawford a lot of credit. Errol Spence was a truly great fighter, and he embarrassed him, so I give him a lot of credit. But I have to agree a little bit with Canelo Alvarez, so it is what it is. Anyways, that's pretty much about it. I'm going to be very interested to see if Boxing Eagle does a review on this, because he talks about Terence Bud Crawford similar in the way that I talk about him, of course with a little bit more vitriol because, he doesn't like Terence Crawford, but it is what it is. But I'm going to be, interested to see if Boxing Eagle comes out with a video on it. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.